degraded life or the society, but through a film. Films bring life to a book, be it regarding the life of someone which needs to be known by the world, or issues in society which is scarcely given its due unless projected through films or documentaries. A thing to ponder in this discussion would be, yes, films do help in communicating, but will a reader always love to read or rather watch a film? Our panelists for this session are immensely talented and the work speaks for them. Still, I would take the honor and introduce them very briefly because I'm sure you all are dying to listen to them more than listening to me. Mr. Yasir Abbasi, a trained cinematographer and a renowned author. He has to his credit several awards for documentaries and independent films. Welcome, you, sir. Mr. Shamya Das Gupta, a famous author and a sports journalist, currently employed with ESPN Cricinfo in Bangalore. He has successfully co-authored 3 books which have become very popular. Ms. Shrayana Bhattacharya, an economist researching social policy and labor besides being a wonderful author. Her writings have appeared in Indian Quarterly, Indian Express, The Caravan, etc., just to name a few. Her first book is to come out this year, Desperately Seeking Sharon. Welcome. We also have, but not here but on Skype, that's why we made this arrangement, Ms. Poonam Saxena, who is the National Weekend Editor at the Hindustan Times and an eminent author. She has successfully translated many novels and has also co-authored Karan Johar's memoir, An Unsuitable Boy. So we're trying to connect her and eventually we'll see who she is, if any of us don't know. And last but not the least, of course, our moderator for the session, Mr. Jayarjan Singh, whose profession itself speaks for his love for writing and movies. He's an independent writer and a critic. He has authored books which have not only been widely accepted, but loved and acclaimed. So, sir, without me wasting any of your valuable time, I request you to commence this session on today's film literature, from celebrity memoirs to sociological studies.
Thanks a lot for that introduction. Is this okay? Is the sound okay? Yeah, okay. I'll try to keep the mic up this time. So we'll just get started, and you can bring Poonam in anytime. One of the things that I'm very happy about having this group of writers here for this session, and Poonam as well, hopefully, is that their work represents a very broad variety of film literature in terms of both content and form. And this is one of the developments that we've seen in Indian publishing over the last 5 or 10 years, which has been a very fecund time for Indian publishing generally. I remember it's been exactly 10 years now, early 2009, since I signed a contract with HarperCollins publishers for a book about the film Jaane Bhi Do Yaaro. It was part of a series that they were doing on iconic Indian films, and they were really, one thing that came across back then was that they wanted to keep it very small, very modest as a series. They didn't have any expectations for the future. The editor used to joke with me about how the marketing team is absolutely not sold on this, no budgets are being earmarked for a book of this sort. And a lot has happened since then. Since then we've had dozens and dozens of cinema books coming out every year in multiple categories: biographies, academic studies, sociological studies, the revisitations of things that happened 60, 70 years ago. And the panelists here represent this. What I'm going to do is, I'll just do a basic introduction, and then if we can get Poonam here, then, is she on? Okay. Then we'll probably start with her. So just to give you an idea of the variety of books we're talking about, Poonam Saxena, as mentioned here, has co-written Karan Johar's memoir. She's also translated a book written by Rahim Masum Raza in the 1970s, which was a novel called Scene 75, but which was very much about, a sort of satire on the film industry of the time. Then, when you say Karan Johar, one of the first names that comes to mind is Shah Rukh Khan, and Shayana's book is not so much about Shah Rukh Khan. It's not about Shah Rukh Khan in anything like the way that Poonam's book is about Karan Johar. It's more of a sociological study of Shah Rukh Khan's fan base. A certain section of the society in which Shah Rukh Khan became a superstar and what his superstardom, his screen persona, the effect that it had on a certain demographic of that society. Young women who were entering the workforce at various points in the last 15-20 years. So that's a very different sort of book from the earlier book I mentioned. Then there's Yasir's book, Ye Un Dino Ki Baat Hai, which is a collection of very carefully and lovingly curated and translated articles from Urdu film magazines from the 1940s to the 80s, dealing with, it's full of these little treasures, these nuggets, like Nargis writing this really loving, considerate obituary for Meena Kumari in 1972, pen profiles of people like Iftikhar, Ajit, K. Asif, lots of treasures that you wouldn't get if you were only in the world of reading English journalism, English film journalism. And finally, here's Shamu's book, which is on the Ramsey brothers, which is a book that I was very pleased to be associated with, and I did the introduction for it. Shamu and I go back a very long way. We were friends in college. And one of the things about the Ramsey brothers book is that it demonstrates that it's possible to do a really good, affectionate, well-researched and well-analyzed book, even about the sort of cinema that many of us just think of as lowbrow, unworthy, not very good, not serious in intention, and so on. And I think that's an important lesson to be learned. I think one of the biggest gaps we have right now is for film literature in the more commercial space. And intelligent, thoughtful writing about films that just get treated as massy, popular, and so on. I think we have, is she on? Yeah. Poonam was kind enough, before we knew that we were doing the Skype thing, she was kind enough to send me an email just sharing some of her thoughts. So I'll just read that out in case. Okay, fine. Hello? Poonam, hi. Hello? Yes, just...
it's not very clear, right?
It's better now. Yeah, can you hear us?
Yes, sort of slightly dimly, but I can. Hi.
Hi. Well, we're very glad to have you here, since we would have loved to have you here in person. And we are starting by asking you to share your thoughts about the Karan Johar book, about how you got started on it. He's a personality who so much has been written about already. He's very high profile. It's not like he's someone who you think you need to discover a lot of new things about. He's so visible. But what you did was you captured a very candid side of him while working on this memoir. Can you just tell us something about your process and why you wanted to work with him in particular?
So can you hear me first of all? Is it clear? Is my voice clear?
Yeah, it's clear.
So, I had interviewed Karan many times in the course of my work, and we had established quite a good rapport. And I really liked him, and I actually liked his movies a lot also. So when I was approached by the publisher and I was asked if I was interested in doing this book, I said yes, and he was happy to do it also. But there were a couple of things that were very important for me before I started on the book. So when I met him, I told him that the thing is that this is not a magazine interview, right? So sometimes when you have a person like Karan who's so much in the eye of the media and is constantly giving interviews, you tend to give these very pat answers, these very templated answers which just come almost involuntarily. So I said you can't do that in a book because it will just become very boring then. So you actually have to think and go back and reflect and say things probably which you haven't said before. Otherwise, there's no point, and you have to be really honest to yourself. So the thing is, he understood immediately what I was saying, and I also told him that when we are doing our interviews and I'm talking to him, I don't want to do like 20-minute sessions or half an hour sessions. We should at least do 2 hours, so that there is a sort of concentrated period of time where he can talk. So that's exactly what we did. We did these long 2-hour sessions where he was not disturbed and where he was able to, as I say, get into the zone, so to speak, and really and reflect and think and then answer questions that I was putting to him. So that is the process we followed, really.
Right. You also, I remember we had spoken about this a couple of years ago when the book first came out, and you mentioned that that you didn't really see the book as an autobiography. You saw it more as a confessional memoir, which is a mid-career thing because he's obviously got a lot of other things that he'll be doing in the future. But you use the term confessional memoir. Could you just tell us a bit more about that?
Sorry, Jay, I couldn't hear you properly. What did you ask?
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Slightly better, yeah.
Yeah, you said that you thought of the book, the Karan Johar book, as a confessional memoir rather than an autobiography. Just tell us why that was?
Oh. So here's the thing. If a book is an autobiography, then I interview Karan and I must cross-check what he has said to me with other people. For example, if he's talking about being an assistant on Dilwale Dulhania, I should speak to people who were on the film and I should get everybody's, memories of what they have to say about it. And this is only his voice. It is not cross-checked by me with other people to make a more, the more composite picture. This is his recollections, his memories, the way he remembers things which sometimes may not be actually perhaps how they happened. This is his memory of what happened and how it happened, which is why it's a memoir, it's not an autobiography. If it was an autobiography, I would have had to meet people from his family, his school, his colleagues, his friends, etc. But that didn't happen. This is a book in his voice, and it is actually as if he is confiding to a reader that this is what happened to me and this is how I remember my life.
Right. It would have been great to have you here sitting with us. I'll come back to you in a bit.
Please.
I'm going to move on to Shayana's book about Shah Rukh Khan's fan base. Shayana, this book has been in the making for a very long time. I remember the first time we did a reading together, which is something that Meenakshi facilitated, was 2.5 years ago in Delhi. And presumably the book has gone through many changes. But of course, it's taken you something like 10 or 10 plus years to do it. Following these women around and speaking with them about their changing lives. Could you tell us a bit about the genesis of the project and also about what your own relationship with Shah Rukh Khan, the superstar, is as as a screen persona?
Am I audible? So in fact, it's funny. I was listening to Poonam, and the book is a confessional memoir of Karan Johar, and my intention, very honestly, at some point when I was thinking about writing the Shah Rukh book, was the real hope that he'd read it, or at some point I will be able to access my favorite actor. He is my favorite actor, and I'll talk a bit. Actually, he's not my favorite actor. He's my favorite film icon in Hindi cinema. I think that's a better way to put it. I'll talk a bit about how I stumbled on this book, or rather how the book found me, and then talk about my relationship with the icon. I am trained as an economist. What economists do is we do a lot of survey work. And one of my first jobs, this is nearly 12 to 13 years ago, was I was doing a series of surveys on women, poor women, who were working in different small industries. For example, people who make agarbattis and incense sticks at home, women who do garment work at home, domestic workers who come and work in our homes. And we were trying to, this was actually for the government, I used to work for a labor union, we were trying to collect estimates and information on wages and working conditions of these women. And so I was sent out at a fairly young age, this was one of my first research projects, to go and interview all these women whose lives I couldn't access because of class issues, caste issues, we were just so different. But I was asked to go and interview them with a survey questionnaire. And this took me to the slums of Ahmedabad, the slums of Delhi, Bihar, villages in Bihar and Jharkhand, as well as rural Uttar Pradesh. And everywhere I went, I noticed that much like if I were to ask you these questions about how much money do you make and are you happy with your office, people used to get very bored with these questions that I was asking them. And they look at me and wonder why you want to know this sorry state of my labor contract or the fact that I don't have one. Why can't we talk about something more interesting instead? And at that point I realized that film is actually one of those, is actually a line that does connect me with a girl living in Latihar in Jharkhand and a woman living in Rampur. Because I would then start asking them about their favorite actors. And lo and behold, I found a whole group of women who were big Shah Rukh Khan fans. And if there's one thing, anyone who knows me will know that if you want to start talking about Shah Rukh and his movies, I'm more than happy to participate in this particular conversation. And then I became really interested in why this one actor or this one icon appeals to women from such different backgrounds, and how is it that they were seeing him, because it was very different from the way I saw Shah Rukh Khan. And I don't know who said this, but if your fantasies reveal more about your realities, in a way when I was asking them about their fantasies on Shah Rukh Khan, they were reflecting on their real lives. So many of the women would say to me, why can't I have a son like him, or why can't I have a husband like him? And then that immediate conversation would go into actual conversations about what was happening in their marital lives, in their family lives. And I decided for a subsection of 8 of these women who I'd gotten to know quite well from very different backgrounds and different occupations, that I would try to keep in touch. Each time a Shah Rukh film would come out, or we try and at least talk about it in one way or the other, and you realize it's actually very difficult to follow a lot of women in this country, because researching women and just reaching out to them consistently is difficult because they're extremely busy. Many of them don't have mobile phones of their own. But I decided to continue, and there was some attrition there as well. And so the book essentially follows a decade in the lives of 8 women, and I'm one of the women who are all big Shah Rukh Khan fans, and tries to tease out how is it that women from very diverse class backgrounds view this icon. And the other, which I think was something that doesn't surprise, I think, people who study film a lot, but surprised me a lot, was how difficult it was for a lot of young women in small town India as well as rural India to just access film. Because you don't have a mobile phone, you don't have connectivity. The cinema hall, there's just a survey that's just come out, in fact this year as well, saying when women were asked what are the most unsafe spaces, cinema halls actually come out as one of the most unsafe spaces for women. And so for a lot of these girls, and they were not watching film the way I would watch film, which would be in a nice air-conditioned theatre. They were watching it on TV. I have one particular person she's a migrant domestic worker from Latehar who moved to Delhi. And she's Catholic and Santhal tribal. And she had to go to church every Sunday. And there was this one month, I remember, I think it was to commemorate Shah Rukh's 50th birthday or something, that one of these channels decided that they would show a film of his every Sunday morning. And she used to work for an American expat in Delhi. She was a live-in domestic worker. And I remember one day she said to me, she said, I have to choose this month, do I pray to Jesus or do I pray to Shah Rukh? And she decided instead Shah Rukh would win because she decided to not go to church. And every Sunday she would religiously sit down and she sort of negotiated it with her employer and said, I want to watch these films. And she's actually one of the only ones, other than me, in the book who has managed to watch a far larger section of his filmography. And so I think the book, of course, it's about him as how his fans view him, but it's actually also just about female desire and the way women interpret and understand masculinity around them, and how that's evolved in at least these women's lives for 10 years.
Yeah. And I think as we were discussing yesterday, very fleetingly, a book like this about Shah Rukh's male fans would be a very different sort of book. And maybe similar in some ways, but also different in other ways. And I think there's a necessary subtext here that one thing that struck me earlier was, I may mention this to you, that all five of us here, Poonam, by the way, can you hear us? Can you hear what's being said?
I can hear bits and pieces, snatches, everything that clearly.
Okay, can we do something with the volume? Yeah, so everyone sitting here. No, I'm just asking if you could hear us.
Sorry?
I'm asking if you could hear us.
Yeah, slightly better now.
Slightly better. Okay. Yeah, so we'll just come back to you in a bit. The fact that everyone here, sort of gets popular cinema to a great degree, and of course, something that's hanging over your project, I haven't read all of it, I've read bits of it, is the importance of this sort of fantasy and aspiration, the big movie star, the big film, the larger than life film, and what it can mean to people. And that's one reason why I'm looking forward to reading the whole book, because one thing that I think all of us, to different degrees, we've discussed this in our personal conversations, is that we just find it a bit problematic when words like escapism, escapist cinema are used as pejoratives, are used in a snobbish way as put downs, and then there's this eulogizing of only realistic or grounded cinema. And in fact, one book I was reading recently, Masala Shakespeare, also touched on this in a very interesting way, about how important fantasy is to human life. And that's one reason why this is a book to greatly look forward to. But I'll come to Yasir now. Yasir's book, which has already been one of the big successes of the last 3-4 months, I think much to his own surprise, because he never fails to, at one of these panel discussions, he never fails to say that I am not a writer. I am not a writer. I'm very he's very diffident about what he's done, but he's selected these wonderful articles and tributes from old Urdu magazines and translated them, which I think is a very big service that he's done to the English language reader and to the film lover generally in India. Can you tell us something about how this project began? Yasir, for you, you're a cinematographer by profession. You're not passionate about writing at all. It's not like you really sort of had to sit down and do some book. This is something you clearly felt that there was some gap in the preservation of our cultural heritage. Just tell us something about the book.
So I'll just begin by providing a background to this. Urdu film magazines were hugely popular in our country for a long, long time. So from say the 1930s to the late 1990s, which is like a good period of 70 odd years. And when I was young, I could see them in practically every Urdu reading household. I am fortunate that my parents taught me Urdu, so I could also read. And they were very, very popular. And my mother used to read one. There was a very popular magazine called Shama. I mean, many people would know about it. So my mother would read it. And the interesting thing with Urdu film magazines was that, like other English film magazines were slightly looked down upon and children were not allowed to read, it wasn't quite so with the Urdu film magazines. And part of the reason for that was that they were semi-literary, and some of the biggest fiction writers of the era would write for them, Khwaja Ahmed Abbas, Ismat Chugtai. So there was a sense of credibility which was attached to them. So coming back to your question, it was around 5 or 6 years ago when I just started wondering about what's happening to Urdu film writing. And like you just mentioned that, you know, there's been a spurt in film books over the last 10-15 odd years, but I could not recall seeing any Urdu ones. And it seemed a little odd because I'd seen how popular these Urdu magazines were. And also, biographies and autobiographies in the film world is a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, till as recent as 20 years back, you wouldn't have film stars writing their own autobiographies or someone else writing their biographies. And so these film magazines contained a very interesting aspect where film stars, directors, actors, musicians, they would write these memoirs or, you know, these pen sketches of their contemporaries. And these were like condensed autobiographies or biographies, which I found very fascinating. Many of these were written by people who were very popular at one point of time, but they're gradually forgotten now. Not much is known about them. So, being inclined towards film history, that's also something which I was very attracted towards. Getting to know about people who you've just heard about, but you don't know how they began their career, their early lives, their childhood. So these were all there, and you know. So I just started looking for 5 or 6 years ago when this thought occurred to me. I just started looking for film magazines. And surprisingly, I couldn't find them. Very unfortunate thing which has happened is that despite their popularity over such a long period of time, these magazines were not archived, either by the libraries or even by the families of their own owners. Various reasons responsible for that, negligence being the primary among them. So I started looking and I couldn't find them anywhere. So gradually I came to know that, you know, libraries and all are not the place to go, because I tried all the libraries I couldn't find them. So I started getting in touch with the private collectors. So, and after a point of time, say around 6 months or so, I kept on looking. There was no book on the anvil till that point of time. So I was just, you know, getting it done as and when I could find time. So which meant traveling, locating private collectors all over and traveling wherever they were. So once I managed to locate a bunch of these magazines, these memoirs or these pen sketches, they immediately stood out because I hadn't quite read anything like them in the English magazines. So I felt something needed to be done about them, but bringing them out in their own, in the original language, Urdu wouldn't have served the purpose, because Urdu has a very limited readership now, and you know, probably no one would have read it had these been brought out again in Urdu. So translation seemed like a very feasible option to do. So I selected pieces, I tried to find various kinds of people, different tones and different directors and actors, and as wide a variety of people as I could. And so yes, that's how it began.
And what were the major challenges in the process of doing it, particularly in selecting? Well, I think I remember you told me I've forgotten who you were talking about, but you told me you had to leave out a few pieces that you would really have liked to put in because of the fear that there might be repetition. So what was some of the stuff that you didn't manage to include?
See, it wasn't as if I was spoiled for the riches. It wasn't as if, you know, I had a very, very wide variety where I had to choose from. So I managed to find very little. I mean, of all the film literature which existed, I think I probably managed to locate only half of them.
Yeah.
So, and these memoirs were not published in every issue. So yes, but there were a few conscious decisions which I had taken. Like I was not repeating names because then it was getting tilted towards, like, for example, too much of Nargis and all.
Yeah.
So I just thought I will not repeat names. So that made me leave out a lot of nice pieces written by Nargis because I had already included one. So things like those. I also chose to let go of posthumous pieces. Pieces which were published after the writer had passed away, because then it could have been contentious whether it was authentic or not. Although I met journalists and they had confirmed that most pieces were authentic. So yes, and a couple of pieces were very similar. Like I had mentioned the other day, I had actually translated a piece by Pran, written by Pran.
Oh yeah, that's the one.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when I was putting it together, I realized that it was very similar to a piece by Ajit, which is already there in the book. Now Pran already has a very widely read biography.
Right,
So it was difficult to leave that out, but I just weighed the pros and cons and just thought of leaving that out.
Before taking this forward, I'll just come to Shamo and his Ramsey Brothers book. I just wanted to say something a little somewhat amusing about this. We were in postgrad together, Shamo and I, 20 years ago. And we used to have lots of, our friendship was founded on, among other things, cinema. And we used to have all these highbrow conversations about people like Bergman and Tarkovsky and Ritik Ghatak, who is another relative of yours. Yeah, he was my first Bengali friend, so a lot of educating had to be done also, in both directions. And now, 20 years later, I have written the introduction for a cinema book that he has written. And what is the book about? It's about the Ramsey brothers. These horror filmmakers, for those of you who don't know, who made what are widely perceived to be B or C or D grade films, but who also, and this is very important, who, if there's an instance in this country of a particular name, a particular filmmaker's name or a filmmaking name being associated with a particular genre of cinema, then that is Ramsey and horror. There is no one else that comes anywhere close to that, right? So if you could just put this book in context for us, because obviously, and incidentally, Yasser also had a long-standing love for this sort of film. But if you could just tell us about how you moved to the dark side, so to speak, and what the difficulties were. The one reason I ask this is because I know from personal experience that it can get very difficult to go to filmmaking families or to the survivors of filmmaking families and try to interview them or try to find relevant papers which more often than not have been long destroyed and no longer exist. So if you can just tell us something about your processes and the difficulties.
Yeah, I'm a sports journalist, and that's what I do for a living. But like we discussed, cinema's fascinating in many ways. Anyway, the Ramseys, you asked about difficulties. Let me answer that first. The best part about doing the book was really, the difficulty was the advantage as well, which was A, that very, very, very little had ever been written about the Ramseys. They always sort of flew under the radar, looked down. I'm sorry if Poonam's offended by this, but by the mainstream film writers, the magazine writers, the Stardusts and film fairs and so on, probably never wrote about them. They did a couple of times. I've used those in the book as well. So even people, and there's a astonishingly huge community that loves the Ramsey films, which I discovered afterwards online. When I started putting the book out on my Facebook, about 100 people who are my friends now on Facebook are horror film fans, and they love the Ramseys and all of that, but they didn't know anything about the family, and that's because very little had been written about them, which is an advantage because there's not too many people to challenge what I write. In the book, if there are factual errors, there's no one telling me that's wrong, which is useful. But so that's one part of it. The reason for doing the book was simply because it was a fascinating story. I'm a sports journalist. I shouldn't be writing on cinema. But at the end of it, you're trying to tell an interesting story, and this was always an interesting story of 7 brothers who just decided to do cheap, when I say cheap, I mean low budget, horror films, when there was no market for horror films. There was no horror cinema in India, really, at the time. You go back to maybe Mehel, how many years back? whatever it is, and very little outside of that really qualified as horror, and they were hugely successful, making lots and lots of money. One nugget I discovered was that in 1984, when I think Sharabi came out, Amitabh Bachchan's Sharabi and various other films came out, it was the second highest grossing film of the year, Purana Mandir, which is incredible. And obviously the stories were interesting. The question you sort of mentioned earlier about meeting people in interviews, again, they had been written about so little and had always felt sort of slighted as far as the industry was concerned or the press was concerned. They were all extremely happy to speak to me. It was almost, I approached them, it was my book in that sense, but they all became damn involved with the book and put me in touch with various other people associated with them, their actors, and so it became a bit of a breeze, especially for someone based in Bangalore doing a book about a family and people living in Bombay. So that was fun. I think at the end of it, it was just a damn good story. And as we were discussing earlier, that was my approach to it as well. All three of them had different approaches to the books they've done. My approach was strictly journalistic and just getting information about the family, not commenting on the films much, not telling people what I thought about the films. And that's also a bit of a risk-avoiding technique, because people like you who, I won't say make a living writing on cinema, but write a lot on cinema, I'm an outsider. I didn't want to get into that zone where I write a book on cinema and everyone jumps on me saying, this is wrong, that's wrong, and so I wanted to avoid that altogether. Plus, of course, doing a journalistic book is what I usually do. I just choose to follow that. Thankfully, it's been well received.
Poonam, I'd like to just come back to you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's actually not bad. I missed a lot of what everyone was saying. So, well, let me just see if I can get you.
No, I just wanted to ask you because you sent me a very nice email last night with some of your thoughts about film literature and about how we were talking earlier about your thoughts about the publishing boom in film literature, about how there are so many more film books now than there were earlier. Because you've been in this field for so long, you've been a culture journalist for decades now, and certainly there was a time 15, 20, 30 years ago when there wasn't this much film literature. I know that you've been following a lot of the film books that are coming out. Can you just tell us about what, in your view, are the gaps that you would like to see filled in film writing? Even though there's so much happening now, what more film writing would you like to see? You mentioned something about wanting to see more about commercial cinema. Could you just tell us something about that?
So Jerry, if I understood your question correctly, sorry, excuse me if I haven't followed everything, so I don't reply exactly based on what you asked. But I think for the longest time, there was this feeling that commercial Hindi films or popular Hindi cinema, I'm saying Hindi cinema because that's what I'm familiar with, did not deserve any attention in terms of books or articles, because it was just so silly and it was masala and it's somebody like Satyajit Ray deserved books, but really nobody wanted to read books about Hindi popular films and what was there to say anything. And for people like me who have always been fans of Hindi movies, it was so hard. You were always, on the defensive, trying to say, no, I really like, why did you like it and so on. But I think that what happened was that after a point, people like me who enjoyed Hindi films and wanted to write about them, not in a making fun of them way, not a sneering at them way, but with genuine affection and research and hard work and sort of looking at it very closely. I think a lot of people like that started writing blogs or you started a very successful blog yourself on movies. So I think people began writing, And simultaneously, I think there was a big publishing boom in India, and publishers were looking for books, non-fiction books, fiction books, and Hindi cinema, by virtue of its popularity, was a very obvious choice. So there was a kind of outlet finally for people who wanted to write about movies. There was a readership. There were people wanting to read those books. There were publishers willing to publish those books, and there were writers who were keen to write those books. So I think it was a very fortunate coming together of a lot of things at the same time. And I think somewhere also people, there was a phase, there was a moment when there was no longer, it was no longer embarrassing to like TV films. It became all right. We sort of crossed that hurdle also at one point. Jay, if I understood you correctly, you also asked me something about the kind of books I would like to see. Did you ask me something like that?
Given that we already have
publishers obviously are looking for books which are going to sell. So they would be interested, say, in a Karan Johar memoir or a biography of, another movie star or a big, a celebrity of some sort. And I can understand that. But actually, if you ask me, what interests me the most is film history, which is why I actually really enjoyed, Ye Un Dino Ki Baat Hai so much. And I think we need to document our cinema of the 40s, 50s, 60s. We need to look at the people who were acting then, the directors. We need to document our music, which is the most beautiful part of the films in a way. It's the most unique aspect of the cinema that we have, lyricists and composers of the caliber that we have. So that is something that I always look forward to, is to really read books which document the journey till now. And I mean, of course, books about current stars and movies right now. And I'm a Shah Rukh fan myself, so happy to have as many books on Shah Rukh. But the thing that I really feel we need, and we don't have enough of right now, so it's happening, is to just document the whole journey of movies right from Silent Days to when Prophets in 1951 till today.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a challenge to do that for reasons that we discussed. There really so much has already been lost.
Exactly.
Yeah, and in fact, I've had this personal experience while working with the Rishikesh Mukherjee book, for instance, going and meeting family members of people who I think of as great cinematographers, editors, screenwriters, people who have been very important to the history of Indian cinema, and you meet their surviving family members, and the family members know little or nothing about what the person did. There's no documentation. That's also part and parcel of the whole history of popular cinema generally. Because when a lot of that history has unfolded, when the films are being made, very often people are thinking of themselves as workmen, who are not so much as artists, people who are just working for the studio, doing their job as well as they can. So they aren't really thinking about things like posterity at that point. And they are, to use a word that I'm using a lot, they are diffident about what they are achieving. And this is true not just in India, it's true internationally as well. The work of great film directors in the West from the 30s and 40s, you have interviews of major directors who are the subject of critical studies today, people like Howard Hawks and John Ford. Read their interviews and they're constantly downgrading their own work, or saying things like, I didn't really think about it, I just went and did what I had to do. And then it's been left for critics, decades later, to not overanalyze, which is what critics often get accused of, but perhaps to look at a filmmaker's entire body of work and look at recurring themes, recurring motifs, see the ways in which this work is a personal sort of thing and it deserves to be scrutinized. But
can I just say one thing here?
Yeah.
What you just said is so true. We are losing people. I mean, I'm always reminded of that Gurugat song, Pichre Sabhi Bari Bari, every year somebody passes away and we lose all the knowledge that that person has. And the second thing is that I think even people in the film industry don't bother with archiving at all. They have no photographs, no posters half the time. It's really sad.
Shreyana, Yasir, I just like to turn this into a free-flowing sort of conversation. Do you, when you speak with people about the fact that you've that you're doing a book not on Shah Rukh, but of course a book that's going to be called Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh Khan looms over it, do you sometimes get a hint of condescension, or why are you working with such a popular big star? Has that happened ever?
My father, to start with. So, so two things. When I started collecting these stories about women who were fans, I was obviously as much interested in the way they understood the icon, but I quickly started to realize that there were deep commonalities in the way they were constructing this man, because this is an act of construction, because of their position in the labor market of India. And what I mean by that is that in the past 15 years, I don't know if people know this has been in the news for a while, the share of women working has been sharply declining. It went from something like 40-something% 15 years ago, and now we're at like 27%. Just this year, the CMIE released a survey which said India lost 11 million jobs last year, and of the 11 million, 8 million were women. And so women being employed and being in the labor force is an extremely difficult position for them to hold and keep. And I realized that a lot of the times they would rely on this actor for what you call escape, or when they would rely on the actor and the imagery and the dialogues and the music for comfort, were actually places and spaces where they were having to negotiate this new role for themselves in the labor market as active earners in their family, and how the family was trying to thwart this freedom. And when I explained it to my father the way I say it now, which is from the perspective of the economy, from the perspective of the labor market, he feels very assured, and he says, oh, this makes sense. But when initially he said, wait, so you're insane about him, and I'll tell you a story in a second, and now you're writing a book about other women who are as insane about this man as you are, and you think this is going to help, how? So there was resistance. I mean, I had to sort of explain this to him as I was doing it. And for him, what he understands of Shah Rukh Khan is that when I was very young, I once decided that I wanted to meet Shah Rukh Khan, and the story is in the book. And I somehow, through various nefarious networks, figured out that he had a house. There was a house in Delhi where he would be during the promotions of Devdas. And at 6 a.m. in the morning, one of my closest friends and we showed up hoping to see him. And he got into a car, and I remember, I'll never forget this, we were all jostling in for an autograph, and he turned and he said to us, he said, next time, and I said, but there'll never be a next time, and this is the only interaction I've had with Mr. Khan. And he turned to me and he said, no, inshallah, there will be a next time. And I think in my father's head, he thinks that these books and this attempt is just my way of manufacturing the next time.
And it isn't.
Maybe 20%, but I think, honestly, once you had, especially because I've been working on this for, as you said, it's been, 10 years is a long time to be collecting stories of women, because this is very much a book about these women. You start to realize, and I think it took that much time for me. Had I written it, I think the original plan actually was to just write it just as status quo, this is the way these women are seeing the actor. I think then he would loom much, much more larger in the substance of the book. But I think when you take 10 years, you start to see these patterns in the way women are approaching him, and what is it about his imagery that is so interesting and appealing to women in these different circumstances. It's much more now a story of, I think, the changing role of women in Indian society and the freedoms that they're having to negotiate through great difficulty. And I think he just becomes, for at least these 8 women, and I think for other women it's different icons or different, forms of struggle. But for these 8 women, including myself, I think we rely on him and the imagery to sort of sublimate from a lot of just struggles of just trying to seek more independence in the world across our class positions.
Yeah, I think among the superstars of the last 2 or 3 decades, he clearly is the most apt person to be doing a project like this one. And also, with any consolation, there's more than one major Shah Rukh fan on this panel. I'm not going to ask Shamo to share his stories about Shah Rukh love from 1999 and 2000. Yeah. But what I will come to, Yasir, just coming to you again. One thing that Poonam said, talking again about the snobbery that gets directed at commercial film and why do a book about this? What's the need? Now Shamo's done something on the Ramsey brothers. Now I did a book on Rishikesh Mukherjee, who's a much more respectable personality than the Ramsey brothers would be, or than a lot of popular filmmakers would be. And yet, when I was doing the book, and even after I did the book, there were people who would just express their reservations and say, why do you need to do a book analyzing these films? Why would you analyze a Golmaal or a Chupke Chupke? And my answer to that is anything in the world can be analyzed if you do it well. Absolutely anything can be. And it really depends on the execution, it depends on how your mind works, how you are stimulated by a particular thing. Have you, and I know you don't think of yourself as a writer, but now that you've got started on this, and hopefully there'll be a sequel to this book as well, but is there an aspect of Indian film history, I'm talking about very deep history, 1930s, 40s, something like that, 20s, that you feel really needs to be pulled out and examined, and that you might consider doing yourself?
That's where film writing in Urdu really intrigues me. Our film history, at least the Hindi film history, has been very comprehensively documented by the English and Hindi film historians. But I feel a very critical chunk, I wouldn't say it's missing, but there's very little information on it, which is the films which were made out of Lahore, pre-partition. So what happened was that, and Lahore was a major center of filmmaking during those days, and big time filmmakers like Dalsut Pancholi and Gardar and Roop Keshori, they were making these mega movies which are now considered landmarks. But you'll find very little information on them, and there's a reason for it. Because these films were being made out of Lahore, so obviously a lot of literature on them is by local journalists. And since the local language of Punjab and Lahore and that area is Urdu, so obviously a lot of literature on these films and these makers is in Urdu, and it is there. It is depleting because it is not being archived, not being cared about. But whatever little I've managed to read, I think it's an absolute treasure. It needs to be pulled out, accessed, translated, whatever. But because if you read the Hindi, even if you read the Encyclopedia of Indian Cinema, it just skims over that period. And Kardar, just like, I think the Wikipedia page of someone like Pancholi, who was, Raj Kapoor, Guru Dutt combined in terms of clout, with 3 lines of a Wikipedia, there's simply no information on it. And a lot of information which is there is actually factually incorrect.
As we were discussing, the Wikipedia entries that are long,
yes,
are just terrible.
Completely, and like
and full of mistakes.
Like I was telling you, like a famous lyricist like Raja Mehdi Ali Khan, his Wikipedia date of birth is 15 years off from the actual thing. I mean, a couple of years here and there can be acceptable. 15 years off. But yeah, and the sad part is that, a lot of writers take the Wikipedia to be the gospel, and, they take the stuff from there, it gets printed, and then it just gets disseminated. And it becomes the truth. Because if you read about Raja Mehdi Ali Khan, you'll get thousands of Google search results which are going to tell you about the factually wrong date of birth. So what do you do about it? So once the Urdu literature is sort of accessed and, the biographies are read and translated, I think that can be rectified. So that's something which I feel very strongly about, and I'm sure that's not just confined to Urdu. Even a lot of good Marathi literature I know of exists, There's a very good biography, apparently, I don't know Marathi, of Vijay Anand, which is there. So I'd love to read it, you know, but someone needs to translate it. So I think we need to look at vernacular literature more seriously.
And also, we're talking about writing right now, but the state of films, old film prints, Alamara, our first talking film, doesn't exist now, right? It exists in something like 11 or 12 stills. It's
and also a lot of misinformation. We feel that Raja Harishchandra exists. It does not actually.
Yeah.
What exists is a later version.
Yeah.
You know, we are also proud that, you know, we have the first film. The film which is there on YouTube and everywhere is actually a remake, but no one knows about it.
Yeah. Something else I want to ask, and just throwing this to all of you, the marketing of cinema books. Because again, now, you know, we've, I think over the course of a lit fest like this, there would be lots of complaints about publishers and how they market or how they don't market. Authors are always, you know, we are in a moment where authors are expected to do a lot of their publicity themselves, which is part of what we're doing here as well. But with film literature, I feel like, and I've experienced this firsthand. I did this Rishikesh Mukherjee book, as I mentioned, which was meant to be a very analytical book. That could be a synonym for boring. But I was determined from the start that it's going to be self-indulgent. I am not going to make it an anecdote-driven book, a journalism-driven book, even if nobody reads it. All I need is the publisher's contact, and I've got that, and I'm going to do what I want to do. When it came to marketing, they were very clear that, you know, we need to at least, this wasn't said to me in so many words, but almost, we need to थोड़ा सा बेवकूफ बनाना है लोगों को. We need to give them the impression that this book will have lots of juicy little tidbits about Rajesh Khanna, kya kar raha tha behind the scenes, that sort of thing. So that does happen. Now, have any of you experienced anything? Yasir, yeah, you I think had a problem with the cover at one point.
Cover, the title, the book was written, finished, and it was just lying for five or six odd months because, you know, then the marketing problem. Not problem, but, you know, there's certain things which the marketing people were coming up with, which I couldn't understand, like Bollywood flashback, the title. So I just couldn't figure out. I was like, this book talks about a period when the word Bollywood wasn't even coined. So, but they're like, you know, no, I mean, this needs to sell and all that. So yeah, I mean, things like that, because it's in a completely different zone. What the kind of suggestions which I'm sure all of you come forward with. So yeah, a lot of problems with the cover, title, and all that.
Yeah.
Because you need, as an author, you need to protect the integrity of the content, and selling it is a completely different ball game altogether. Apparently.
But you know what? And I'm sure.
Putting the catchwords, what are the keywords
Yeah.
in the title for internet searches?
Yeah, that happened with me also. But I'm sure Poonam would agree with this because she was talking some time back about books that are perceived as they're going to be bestsellers. They need to be a certain sort of book. I think one of the most heartening things that's happened in the last 3 months is that your book has become a bestseller. Because really it's a sort of book that in concept, I'm sure many publishers and editors would have said, okay, you know, we'll do it. But this is not going to be our big earners or something. And with the title that you wanted, or without something like Bollywood flashback, it's become the yeah.
No, I was just going to add. In fact, I had the reverse, where when people look at the name of the book, it says Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh, and someone, I won't name the person, they said to me, "Bas Shah Rukh ke naam pe chalegi." And they open the book and they realize this is about women, the workforce. It's a sociological study of what's happened to India and women in India in certain parts for 10 years. And so, but you should add more bits and so on, and it confuses people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's odd, you know, in terms of you put in the name of an actor, and the assumption is not so much about how these images, what they mean to people, but it's immediately, you know, the gossip blogs and that kind of news.
Yeah, and I'd like to see what happens eventually with the I'm sure, you know, because you have it's going to be promoted as an academic, semi-academic sort of book. I'm sure nobody's going to try and completely fool readers by making claims for it as a Shah Rukh Khan book. But I can tell you, I have so many 1-star reviews on Amazon.com from people who are saying things like, ये writer बस अपने, he's just going on talking about what he thinks about these films. Why isn't he telling us what Rishikesh Mukherjee, what happened during the making of Golmaal? And I finally fought a bit, and I got Penguin to write on the jacket, the jacket description, which also goes on Amazon, that this is critical study hai, this is, it's not a biography, it's not an anecdote driven thing. I got that quote, but still I've had this response from people who, I suspect you will have some of that at least. ये शाहरुख और गौरी के बारे में क्यों नहीं है, all that, you'll have that. Have you had any such, well, you're married to your edit, correct?
With the edits. No, I won't diss the audience and people who don't like what I write, so I'm not going there. Just to go back to an earlier point, and we've been talking about Hindi cinema, and that's probably what we'll continue talking about and working with most of us, or do. But at some level, again, we're talking about Hindi films, but we're talking about India on the whole. Stressing again that I'm a sports journalist, and one of the things I've always wondered about are the great cricketers on whom there's not a book. It doesn't have to be a huge book, doesn't have to be a tome. There was a period in the 2000s when there was a Sachin Tendulkar book every year. Actually, true story. And with nothing new. And they came out, they're all bestsellers, honestly. Internet, I don't see a good photograph of Motilal, who was a huge star. And so on. So FTI, the Prince, and being submerged in water and whatever else the cases are. It's a general apathy towards history generally in India. But I'm quite sure, not Poonam's because it's a Karan Johar book, these 3 books might not have been published 10 years back. 10 years back. Yours would have been. In a different way, maybe an academic sort of, it would have fitted into the academic sort of bracket then. But I think it's great on 2 fronts. Last year, what was the Woman in the Window? What's the name of the book? Yeah. That's an outstanding book. Woman in the Window. Yeah. So I think it's damn good. Forget sales, forget readers. That's not something we can do anything about. The fact that publishers are putting out these books, they're all coming out, right? All these books are coming out. Where today, talked about Marathi cinema, Uttam Kumar was probably at par with Amitabh Bachchan as far as Bengalis. There's not one good book on him. And Bengal is supposed to be the cultural book reading kind of people. I think it's outstanding what we have right now. And I think we can build on it in whatever way we can. You're talking about gaps, those are the gaps, monographs perhaps. Everything doesn't have to be a biography or 300, 400 pages. You can have monographs, series of monographs. We were discussing novelization of great scripts. Perhaps that could be one. And what I miss the most are the smaller stars, the side heroes, the character actors who I think we should all be doing a lot more about. Maybe a book with 10 of them, 10 semi-villains or backup villains, 10 vamps, whatever. There's so many fascinating characters from cinema.
Also technicians.
Technicians. I was just going to mention Madanlal Dreswala,
Correct.
who has probably done more films than anyone else.
Right.
Every film.
I know. And we have around half a dozen books in Gurudat, but not one on V.K. Murthy.
Yeah.
So which is so unfortunate, because we all know how immense his contribution was to Gurudat, to making who Gurudat eventually became.
Yeah.
We have 10 books on Raj Kapoor, not one on Shailendra.
Yeah.
Or Hasrat Jaipuri, or
Right.
even someone like Majlu Sultanpuri, who remained in the top bracket of songwriters for 50 odd years.
Yeah.
So we tend to gravitate towards stars, which is fine. I mean, people, if someone is really interested to write about them, they can go ahead. But we not at the cost of technicians and all. But I think publishers need to be a little more enterprising in that.
Yeah.
The writers need to be more enterprising at this moment.
Correct.
I think
Publishers are willing to publish.
I think writers also need to be able to do these things in interesting ways.
And when someone does come forward, like Akshay Manwani wrote a book on Sahil Ludhianvi, and it apparently sold very well.
Yeah, it
So-
sold very well. Yeah, which was a surprise to him as well.
Right.
Because he was another one who.
Also as writers, we have these big myths created in our own heads So we need to, like when I was writing my own book, I was very skeptical whether anyone was ever going to read it or not.
Yeah.
But, I mean, so we also need to, take a little more risks as
No,
writers.
writers have big myths in their heads. A lot of those are publisher created. Publishers have lots of ideas about what will sell, what won't, and I think a lot of that needs to be revised at the very least. I'm wondering, do we have questions from the audience? If then maybe we can touch on one or two other things that. Yeah.
Good evening to all of you. My question is to all of you. The question is that government recently have told that there would be a single window clearance system for the film industry. So, how do you think that it will help us in getting the permission? It will not take much time for taking the shooting. It will not take much time for taking for getting the permission for the shooting. And my second thing after this conversation, I had one suggestion about how the facts are losing. There is no dates and all the audios and interviews are getting losing. We can do one thing that the government or anyone can make a website and collect all these video, but I don't know how much time will it take.
Well, so much is already lost. There has, to some degree, the NFDC has done some stuff, right? Though I have to say, at risk of getting bitchy again, we've had restorations of important films on their website with the aspect ratios completely off. Which is also a problem if you're a serious film watcher. Does anyone want to? Yeah.
Only from a business point of view. So the clearance system, it's supposed, it does two things which actually many industries want. It's not just the film industry, it's reduced transaction costs and speed up time for at least clearance. It certainly seems to have done that. They're all now celebrating. The Producer Guild, I believe, has welcomed the move as well. I know that people who look at it much more from the, the economic perspective of the business, they seem to be supporting it, but that's as much as I can.
And sir, regarding the sports enthusiast, Rajdeep Sardesai sir has also written one book, The Democracy 11.
Yeah, I think you wanted to try something different. Sort of going through the eras.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you like it?
I haven't read, but I have seen the.
It's interesting.
It's interesting.
It's about 11 cricketers who
Correct.
define those eras.
Yes. And what is your take on the recent captain, Virat Kohli? How means
It's a cinema session.
Can I?
Let's not allow Shamu to talk about such things.
Can I
No?
just say one thing though? Not really. I just wanted to say one thing, we've been talking about losing film history, but one thing I realized while doing research for the Shah Rukh book is how data blind the Hindi film industry is. So this is actually data currently. So for example, I wanted statistics on who is watching film, where, right? What share of the audience is female. And what's fascinating to me is in the US, in the UK as well, you have firms whose core market business is to collect this kind of information for production houses. And I interviewed people in the Production Guild of India, for the Hindi film industry, and they essentially said to me, even, I think we all know Rentrack, to even get box office collection data verified has been quite difficult to do. And it's interesting that, when you ask people who is watching films, they'll say, well, through focus groups and some sociological information, we have some idea, but we don't have systematic.
Ideas there is actually from the metros.
Exactly.
Beyond.
And for example, Mayank Shekhar had a piece, I believe, this was a while ago, saying how Hindi cinema has always been an urban medium. Now, what's happening increasingly, at least what I found, is with images now available on satellite TV, on phones, I think people's access has just become so splintered. One funny story about that is, I think some people here know this, I got Google to give me search data for which actor is being searched for where. because I wanted to do an analysis of Salman, Amir, Shah Rukh, Ranbir, all these searches for male icons. And what's fascinating is that you realize the places where people are actually looking up these actors are not immediately what you would be thinking of. And I think there's an interesting story there, how little and how we know about who's watching these films and how data blind the industry is.
Shamo wasn't privy to this conversation, so ask him the Shah Rukh question.
No, actually this is a question for anyone.
Ask.
So does anybody have a guess if I were to ask you the one city which searches the most for Shah Rukh Khan and the one city that searches the most for Salman in India on Google, do you have any sense of what that would be?
Salman will be Indore.
Indore, okay, so we've got Indore.
Bombay.
For Shah Rukh, it would be Delhi.
Delhi. Actually, I think lots of, how many people are saying Delhi? Just
For Shah
raise it.
Rukh.
For Shah Rukh, Delhi.
And people saying smaller towns like in Indore or other state capital? Go on. And yours is? It's actually Kochi. This is the interesting. It's Kerala. And what's fascinating, I mean, please read the book as and when it's out. What's fascinating is Salman, unsurprisingly, it's sort of, Haryana, Punjab, these areas. And I was in Kerala, and I think this just goes to, how little we know about who's watching film, because I was in Kerala and I went and I was talking to women's groups and I was interested in why is it that there's an interest in Shah Rukh, and what I found was, at least the explanation being given to me was that women are more out and about in Kerala compared to many other states in the country. The labor force participation rates for women are also higher in Kerala, and Kochi is actually one of the higher parts even within the state. And what was most fascinating was I was asking a few young boys, do you not like Salman? And they said, why would we watch Salman when we have Mammootty? Right? So there are local icons, I mean there's regional cinema going to that point. And I think what would really be fascinating, I mean in terms of, books to look out for is just a deep analysis and engagement with who is watching what films where, right? Because I don't think we have that.
Any other questions? Yeah, we have a question here.
Hello panelists, myself Shraddha. First of all, it's great to see young authors speaking, being myself a youngster. So my question is a bit out of the track. I apologize for it, but I couldn't resist myself. So it's basically, I want to ask each of you that what were the struggles you faced when you initially started writing, and what you learned from it, the greatest lesson you learned from it, and what would you like to, advise the upcoming youngsters from it, how to choose the perfect vocabulary, because it's literally a struggle, a true struggle, to choose perfect sentences. You have so many thoughts in your mind, but you will express yourself. I mean, I'm facing these difficulties to choose the perfect vocabulary. I have amazing thoughts, but like when I started penning it down, like I cut the sentences, I will clear the pages. So it's a real struggle. So seeing the young writers, I couldn't resist myself without asking about it. If you don't mind, would you like to answer it? I mean,
well, we can talk about struggles and so on. When it comes to things like vocabulary, I'm not sure this would be the right forum, because it's not like any of us sitting here just sat down, got up one day and decided to start writing a book. All of us have been through processes. We've been through journalistic training, or in some cases English literature. We've written lots of other things, starting with articles, over many years, and then worked on books. So I'm not really sure we should be talking about something as basic as vocabulary or sentence choosing. That's something I think all of us, by the time we started working on our books, we were fairly experienced in those areas. But when it comes to things like actual decision making about how to structure a book, for instance, or how to go about it, what to prioritize in, whether you're talking about the Ramsey brothers or Shah Rukh's fans, I don't know, do any of you have thoughts on that?
Offhand, no, but I think, at least my experience, and none of us, I think, can generalize and say there's a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. I think a structure. Okay, your other question, the vocabulary thing, I won't answer that question directly, but I'll tell you to read as much as you can. That's really, I think, the only way to write. Now, once you do a fair amount of that, I think the structures sort of emerge on their own. A book like mine, which is journalistic, based on lots of interviews and stuff like that, once you've done everything, I think the structure emerges on its own.
It comes.
Yes, so, and it can only happen once you have the whole material in your hands. That's for me.
See, luck will always play a part, as it does in everything. When I set out to do my Janaki to Yellow book, I was faced with a lot of, the challenges included the fact that nobody was being paid to do cinema books at the time. I was flying to Bombay on my own expense. I live in Delhi. Taking risks with people, these aren't big superstars I was trying to meet, but even someone like Nasiruddin Shah was busy enough that he'd give me an appointment, and then after I landed at Bombay airport, I get a text saying, sorry, I'm not here the next 2. Things like that happened. I was doing all this on my own expense. Where things really picked up for me, where I lucked out and hopefully started, and hopefully some of the credit goes to me as well, is when I met the director of the film, Janaki Kundan Shah, who passed away just last year very sadly. And he really, after he got it in his head that I'm the right person to do this, he really opened the doors of his office to me, spent lots of time with me, gave me 7-8 days, 5-6 hours every day. And at that point, with his stories and the way he told those stories, the book almost started writing itself. So I got lucky in that sense. After that, of course, I had to do a lot of work, I had to do structuring, but that will also happen. At other times, you'll find yourself alone in a room for weeks on end with no idea of how to structure. You'll be writing stray, unfinished sentences in various word files. At some point, after weeks of brooding, you might open 2-3 of those word files, and suddenly some spark might get lit. And you make a connection between this and that, and suddenly you feel like you've almost got a chapter ready. It works that way. For some writers, maybe it's easier, but yeah.
Let's stick to writing, let's stick to so, I'm sorry. I have a question for Yasir. Is there anything by Manto or on Manto in your book?
Two pieces, both by Raja Mehdi Khan, who was very close to him personally also, and professionally also he was associated with him. And two pieces which are completely contrasting in tones. One is a very somber piece, and one is a very funny, light-hearted thing.
And do you have a Bengali translation, Hindi translation of your Urdu articles?
No, not yet. The publishers were pondering over it. But the thing is, Devanagari and Urdu, to come out in Devanagari is almost, getting the original Urdu written in Devanagari script. So there might be some issues of copyright over that, because you need to, because you're using someone else's text in their own words. So that's what the publishers told me, but it has been contemplated upon. Devanagari. 70 years after the writer passes away, that is the law.
Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Basant Goi. I am not into film but I have a question quite personal. Recently I watched one Bollywood movie where the name of the movie, I just want to name the mention of the movie, it's called Kerala. I saw there the heroine is taken by the father to one river for holy baths. Because he married one boy, he is from the opposite religion. So father is taking his daughter to river for a holy bath. And yesterday also I saw a movie, एक लड़की को देखा जब okay. So there is also the heroism questions because he is going to marry someone who is also opposite religions. So my question is this, it's my personal opinion. I am asking the question, sir. I believe the recent Bollywood movies are getting slightly radical in terms of religions. I can understand that why this kind of thing is projected or why this kind of thing not censored by the censor board. Because we have to see the unity and how the other cultural angle of this entire country. So I just like to know, sir, this can be seen, which is quite bureaucratic, which is quite bad. quite
No,
deep.
I'm not sure I completely got that, but are you saying why are films showing religious conflict? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying, but what I'm saying is why these kind of scenes are being projected by the movie makers.
What kinds of scenes? Sorry? Well, you know, I don't know.
What I
Religious sensitivity.
is something is like, I don't want.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, I think this entire panel, I don't know everyone very well, but I think none of us like censorship in any way anyway.
Pardon, sir?
So, probably not the right people to answer this because I don't think any of us really like the idea of censorship in any sphere of life.
Okay.
That's all I have to say. But the obvious answer, this is not my answer, is you can choose to watch what you want to watch and not watch what you don't like. So, no?
also based on what little I got of the specific question you asked, the specific scene you were talking about, we're not talking about the film manufacturing some thought or idea or situation that doesn't exist in the real world. In the real world, unfortunately, there is not always great reserves of unity and harmony. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm pretty anti-censorship myself, so I'm not sure I could. Anyone else? Yeah.
Oh, this is to Shaya. These 8 women you interviewed, what are their daughters, if they have daughters, views of Shah Rukh Khan? Because I remember my mother was crazy about Dharmendra. Nobody remembers now.
So, actually I do go into this in the book. Not all of them have daughters, a few do. One, actually, I'll tell you one particular story which I think captures this quite well. I followed a lady who was actually a very important union member in Ahmedabad, who was involved in agitating for increased wages for agarbatti workers in the particular neighborhood she used to work in. And she's quite with a firm, strong lady, mad Shah Rukh fan, and I was surprised to find she was a Shah Rukh fan because it just didn't strike me as something we would have in common. Her daughter has watched his films, and actually more than watching his films, given the economic circumstances these women live in, they've heard the songs and seen his interviews more in Hindi press and so on, and even in Gujarati press. So it's not so much they watch the films. Whereas the daughter tells me, when I ask her, who do you like now? She has this deep fondness for Shah Rukh, but it's something she almost feels she's inherited from her mother because they listen to these songs together, and there's a larger story there which I'd urge you to read the book to understand. When I ask her, who do you like? She says, none of the men. And her biggest fan, she's the biggest fan of her Kangana Ranaut or a Priyanka Chopra, because for her now the icons are women. And I think there is a shift here, at least that's something I talk about in the book, which is I think for a lot of women of a previous generation, you needed to rely on men for support, subsistence and safety. And I think there's increasingly a generation of women who have a deep appetite, a far deeper appetite for freedom. And they realize they can have it on their own terms. So they'll say to me, look at Priyanka, she's made it on her own. Look at Kangana, she's fighting with everyone. And that's sort of, so amongst the men, and in fact, I've tried this exercise with her and a few other, the next generation. Something that's really interesting to me is actually it's all the women, so maybe the next Shah Rukh is Kangana, who knows? I'm just saying that, it's women more than men.
Any other questions?
Hi, my question is kind of on the lines of what you just said, specifically about towards empowering the women of the industry. But do you think in some way the culture of projecting that one person as a hero, the icon, is somewhere getting lost? For instance, okay, before Shah Rukh it was Amitabh, before that it has always remained, but right now you can't really pinpoint any of the male superstars as the one icon defining the... Do you think somewhere Bollywood is moving from that genre anyway?
So, Ranveer Singh was interviewed, I believe, and this is the wonderful thing when you write books on icons, you have an excuse to watch everything that anyone has said from film. And so I watched several Ranveer Singh and Ranveer Kapoor interviews, amongst the young men who are sort of contenders. And what's interesting is he actually said, I don't think there will be another superstar. And I think even Maya Shekhar and people who write on film have said Shah Rukh is the last monarch of Bollywood. And the reasons are actually related to that conversation we were having about who's watching film and how they're watching it. The market is too fragmented now. So now you have very differentiated audiences for very different kinds of content, and they're all doing well. So for people like me, I could watch a Rajkumar Rao film or a Ayushmann Khurrana film and absolutely love it. I mentioned Ayushmann Khurrana. One of the last things I did when I was writing the book was I went to Mannat, which is Shah Rukh's house, and I was standing outside the house. I wanted to see the scene, and I interviewed a few young women who were outside the house, and I mentioned these names of new actors, but they didn't know who Ayushmann Khurrana was, right? And for them, it's a completely different, they were mentioning names